Earlier this evening, in the AIR auditorium at Broadcasting House in New Delhi, Shri K P S Menon delivered the first of 3 lectures in this year's series of Patel Memorial Lectures on Resurgence of India, Reformation or Revolution. The Union Finance Minister, Shri Morarji Desai, presided over this evening's function. In the first part of Shri Menon's speech, which you will now hear, he gave a few revealing glimpses into the personality of Sardar Patel in the context of the resurgence of India. He then touched upon the various forms the resurgence of Asia, Africa and Europe have taken in recent years.
I am very grateful to the Ministry of Information and in particular to the All India Radio for the great honor they have done me by asking me to deliver these lectures. And as if to make me feel doubly honored, they sent me a list of the lecturers in previous years. That, I am afraid, made me altogether nervous, because it was a formidable list consisting of such illustrious names as Rajaji, Dr. Zakir Hussain, Dr. Haldane, Dr. Krishnan, Dr. Tarachand, and Dr. Verrier Elwin. In fact, a doctorate seems to be the minimum qualification for delivering this lecture. Rajaji might seem to be an exception, but he really isn't, because as we all know, he is also a doctor, a universal doctor prescribing remedies for the ills of mankind. As for myself, the only doctorate I can boast of is an honorary one, and that given by a foreign university. And I hope you will forgive me if I am not able to keep up the standard of my distinguished predecessors. As you know, these lectures have been instituted to perpetuate the memory of Sardar Patel. His memory is worth cherishing, particularly at a time like the present. For in a national emergency, he was completely fearless. He was, to use that lovely simile from the Gita, he was like a flame in a windless spot which will not flicker. Today, India is by no means windless. For the first time in 4,000 years, winds from the north and northeast, cold, cruel, biting, bitter, have blown across the Himalayas into our peaceful homelands. If Sardar Patel had been alive today, he would have been glad to see how the entire nation has risen like a flame, refusing to flicker under the blasts of Chinese imperialism. It is usual to begin these lectures by paying a tribute to Sardar Patel. But who am I to pay a tribute to him? For me to pay a tribute to Sardar Patel would be like a mason paying a compliment to Michelangelo. And I always thought that there was something in common between Michelangelo and Sardar Patel, something in common between the creations of Michelangelo and Sardar Patel. He had something of that massive strength, that concealed power, that mobile immobility. Sardar Patel's, the greatness of Michelangelo has been summed up in the phrase ex forte dulcedo. Out of strength comes forth sweetness. India and the world knew something of his strength, but those who knew him well also knew something of his sweetness. Another Menon knew him well, V.P. Menon, who was his principal lieutenant in the monumental task of integrating the Indian states. And he used to tell me that wherever Sardar Patel might be, he would ring him up before he retired and ask him about any special happenings during the day. And there would come over the telephone his directions, crisp, clear, categorical, unequivocal. Sardar Patel was essentially a man of deeds and not of words. Well, perhaps there is something incongruous in the All India Radio celebrating his memory by means of these lectures, because the Sardar was averse to lecturing. I am told that at a meeting of the All India Congress Committee, perhaps our respected chairman was present on that occasion, I am told that a meeting of the AICC, a certain faction made tedious and interminable speeches and held up the proceedings of the committee. Sardar Patel was obviously annoyed, and towards the end of the conference, he got up and, in a scarcely veiled allusion to this faction, he got up and thanked the 500 cows of the Goshala, which had yielded milk quietly and patriotically to the delegates without making any speeches or complaints or protests. I have a feeling that is the way Sardar Patel would have liked our princes to hand over their sovereignty to the government of India. Many princes did so. Some did out of patriotism. Some did out of a sense of enlightened self-interest. Some did out of a sense of fatalism. Some kicked against the fate that was in store for them, but none of them proved as stubborn as was feared in British days. Once, it is said, Sir Ali Imam, who was a member of the Viceroy's Council, he remarked that if the Nizam were, if the British were to leave India today, the Nizam would plant his flag in Bombay tomorrow. But, said Sir Shankaran Nair, who succeeded him, Sir Ali forgets that Pune is on the way. Actually, after independence, as we know, there arose a party in Hyderabad which wanted to plant its flag not merely in Bombay but in Delhi itself, with the cry of Chalo Delhi. How all these elements fared at the hands of the Sardar is a matter of history. Sardar Patel was primarily interested in home affairs, not in foreign affairs. He was, however, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Cabinet. Generally, he played a silent role. Occasionally, I have heard him make a remark, a characteristically Patelian remark. Once the subject under discussion was Korea. It was in the early stages of the Korean War. General MacArthur had carried out a brilliant landing in Incheon and turned out the North Korean troops from South Korea. Intoxicated by the success of this feat, he crossed the 38th parallel and invaded North Korea without authorization from the United Nations and without authorization even from his own government. At that time, our ambassador to Japan was K. Chetur, who had a very vigorous but rather rhetorical pen. He sent a report vividly describing the horrors of the war, describing how towns and cities were being bombed, how men, women, and children were being killed, how the population of Korea was being decimated. The report was read out at the meeting, and Sardar Patel, who was listening without seeming to listen at all, suddenly woke up and said, "Who's this man who has written the report? Is he a Jain?" That, that I think was typical of Sardar Patel. He accepted nonviolence as a political weapon to wrest independence from the hands of Great Britain. But he did not accept it as a creed or as a panacea for all the evils of the world. In any case, he thought there was no point in dwelling on the horrors of war, because war itself is horrible. He might perhaps have also thought that somehow, through war, Korea might regain unity. It might not have struck him that for Korea to regain unity under the auspices of Syngman Rhee would have been a remedy worse than the disease. Because if North Korea was dictatorial, so was South Korea. If Kim Il-sung was totalitarian, so was Syngman Rhee. And it was a dictatorship without a purpose. It had no motive power except anti-communism. And subsequent events in South Korea, which resulted in the expulsion of Syngman Rhee, showed that governments like his, governments which follow purely negative policies, cannot last for any length of time in Asia. On another occasion, we were discussing Korea. Apart from the members of the committee, of the ministerial committee, half a dozen secretaries were present. A number of proposals were considered for bringing pressure to bear on Korea, economic and political pressure to bear on Goa. The discussion went on for a long time. Rajaji raised the debate altogether to a higher and almost ethereal plane. Rajaji said that he was against the application of any pressure to the government of Goa. The Goans, after all, said Rajaji, are our brothers. We must win over Goa by love. Sardar Patel had no such illusions. He knew that the government of Goa was not susceptible to the ways of love or to the ways of persuasion. I must confess, I was surprised at the reactions in certain foreign papers to our action in respect of Goa. Some commentators, who are normally by no means Gandhian, even put on Gandhian clothing and condemned the government of India for departing from Gandhian principles. But surely they must have known the history of this case. I remember I myself, when I was foreign secretary, I asked the French ambassador and the Portuguese minister to come and see me, and I gave them identical memorandum saying that the French and the Portuguese settlements were an anomaly in India. They were always anomalous. They were more anomalous than ever now that the British had left India. And therefore, we suggested that it was time for them to enter into negotiations with a view to the peaceful transfer of these settlements to India. The French ambassador received the memorandum politely and said he would refer it to his government. The Portuguese minister refused to receive the memorandum at all. He said he was not competent to discuss the sovereignty of Goa. All that he could discuss would be such minor problems as smuggling or illicit distillation on the Goa frontier. That showed the difference between France and Portugal. The French behaved like gentlemen, maybe imperialist gentlemen, but gentlemen all the same, while the Portuguese behaved like fanatics. The French lived in the 20th century. The Portuguese lived in the 16th century, when the Pope issued a bull giving half the world to Spain and the other half to Portugal. The French knew, as President de Gaulle said, that the wind of history was turning over a new leaf in Asia and Africa. The Portuguese refused to admit that there was such a thing as a wind of history at all. Eventually, after 14 years of waiting, India, the wind of history, brought Goa back to India. And we can be certain that one day, and let's hope sooner rather than later, it will happen to Angola too. Well, whatever one may think of certain aspects of Sardar Patel's methods and policies, there is little doubt that he was cast in a large mold, in a truly Michelangelesque mold. I shall not apologize to you for spending so much time on mentioning these incidents, for after all, these are the Sardar Patel lectures, and such matters as the integration of the states and the integration of Goa have a bearing on our subject, namely the resurgence of India. One problem which always worried, which concerned Sardar Patel, was the problem of reconciling liberty with stability. This is a problem which worried him, worried not only Sardar Patel, but which has worried political philosophers from time immemorial. How is one to reconcile law with liberty, freedom with order? Freedom without order degenerates into license, and order without freedom is the surest road to totalitarianism. And in Asia, we have had examples of both types of governments. We may congratulate ourselves that in our country, in any case, on the whole, freedom and order have been marching side by side. For this, of course, the credit goes to Mahatma Gandhi, who, with all his zeal for freedom, insisted on strict discipline, and also on the fact that unlike almost any other country, we have had, since the end of the war, since independence, we have had continuity in our government, which is headed by the same person, and that by the man whom Gandhiji designated as his political heir. Well, so far we have refer to certain offshoots of the resurgence of India. Now let us talk about the resurgence itself. What does resurgence mean? The Oxford English Dictionary defines resurgence as an experience in resurrection. In that sense of the word, India is undergoing a new resurgence today, a new resurrection. The Chinese, during the last few weeks, the Chinese have done more to integrate India, to resurrect India, than any number of integration committees could have done. But it is not of this resurgence that we shall speak today, but of an earlier resurgence which led to the independence of India. That too is topical, because the spirit which we cultivated then, the lessons which we learnt then, will be valuable to us even in this crisis. This resurgence, of course, was not confined to India. It was part of the resurgence of Asia. Not merely Asia, but Africa. And the resurgence of Africa promises to be swifter and even more spectacular. And if South Africa persists in its present policies, undoubtedly the resurgence of Africa is likely to prove more cataclysmic. But there has been a resurgence not merely in Asia and in Africa, but in Europe too. But the resurgence of Europe has been accompanied by a recession not in the economic sense of the word, not in the Marxist sense of the word, but you might say a kind of political recession, a recession from the policies of imperialism. In the 19th century, all Asia was dependent. Even countries which were not formally dependent, even countries like China and Iran were in fact dependent. In fact, their condition was perhaps in some respects worse than India. For while India was exploited by a single power, which for that very reason felt a certain moral responsibility, vague moral responsibility towards India, the other countries became the objects of a kind of multiple exploitation. China, said Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the architect of the revolution of 1911, China, said Dr. Sun Yat-sen, is not a colony, but a hypo-colony, a colony of all nations. Today, all Asia is free. Even that ugly little pimple on the face of India, Goa, has become free. And as for places like Hong Kong and Macau, as Mao Zedong said with sublime arrogance, as for these places, he said, they are just a matter of a single telephone call.
You were listening to the first part of the Patel Memorial Lectures by Sri K P S Menon on Resurgence of India, Reformation or Revolution. Presiding over this evening's function, Sri Moraji Desai stated,
Friends, I am presiding at the lecture just delivered by Sri K P S Menon on the occasion of the lecture series which has been established annually by the Information Ministry in memory of Sardar Patel It is as well that this lecture series have been established because Sardar Sahib was the first information minister of independent India, and he laid a foundation for it which I am quite sure is as true and strong as the foundation he laid for India by merging 600 and all odd states into one government and making a real independent India. Sri K P S Menon has, with his characteristic style, given us a preliminary picture
Radio Archives recording
of the subject which he is dealing with, and I am quite sure it was as interesting to you as to me. He is very modest and humble, as every person of knowledge ought to be. And he tried to show as if he is beginning to feel old because he is in retirement. He may have retired from service, but he has not retired from life. And therefore the talk of retirement should be forgotten by him. He is as much alive as he was when he was a student. That's what I find from what he has told us. And his memory is very vivid, and his style is very refreshing, very charming and very simple. I am a very prosaic person, but I found his style very poetic. Even a prosaic person is able to appreciate it, shows what great charm was in that style. I say this because I felt very much interested in what he said. But there was one reference made by him with which I am not able to agree, and that was about the resurgence of Europe, which he called recession. I believe that the resurgence of Europe as a result of their shedding imperialism has been more true than even our resurgence, because they have been freed from a malady which was not only keeping them ill, but which was keeping others ill. And imperialism harms not only those who suffer from its severity and control, but those who are responsible for it suffer more because they imbibe qualities which cannot be called virtues. And Europe, as a result of this shedding of imperialism, is now getting into its real heritage, as I might call it. And therefore it is also the real resurgence of Europe, which will do it good and which will also do the world good. The resurgence of India, of course, has been the cause of resurgence in Asia and in Africa, because the resurgence in India began when it had not begun almost anywhere
This
else
is All India Radio.
in similar circumstances. And Mahatma Gandhi had said, with a very prophetic vision, years back, when he started his revolution of thought and action and speech in this country. He said that the freedom of India will bring about the freedom of whole of Asia and of Africa in a short time. And this is what we are now seeing. Most of the countries are free, a few are not yet free, but I have no doubt that they will not have to wait for more than 5 years to be free. Even 5 years may be a long period. That is how history is marching. I remember this because when I went to Belgium 4 years ago, no, not when I went there then, but when I was in Bombay as its chief minister, a politician or a businessman who of high standing, who was a visitor in Bombay, saw me, and he asked me about Congo. And while we were arguing, I said it was very wrong of them to continue there. And I said it was good while the going is good. If they went away now, they will be remembered with affection. But if they did not go, they will have to go in 5 years.
This is All India Radio Archives recording.
And it so happened, not that I was a prophet or an astrologer, but I did see political movement taking place at that time, and it exactly happened in 5 years. It was therefore at this time when I went to Brussels that gentleman came to see me at the airport and reminded me of this and asked me how I had told him that this will happen in 5 years. I did not think there was any strange thing in what I said. As I have been saying just now, that the remaining countries are going to be free within 5 years. But what I want to convey is that Mahatma Gandhi's prophecy has come true, and I hope that his prophecy about the resurgence of India will also come true. That the coming of freedom to India will not merely mean a rich and happy India for itself, but it will mean the creation of India in such a manner that the people of India live in equality, free from all fear, and with a mission to help in the establishment of peace
This is All India Radio
and
Archives
equality and happiness in the whole world. And it is only when that happens that the resurgence of India will be complete. We have been helped in this resurgence by several circumstances in the past. And I am sure that the deceitful and cruel aggression that we have met from China today is going to be the greatest and lost instrument of our final resurgence. It will help us to build this great country in the pattern in which we want to build it. A society of free and equal men and women with freedom from all fear, with no notions of high and low, with no possibility of exploitation of any kind, politically, socially, or otherwise.
Concluding, Shri Morarji Desai said,
As I said, this Chinese aggression is giving us now an instrument, and has given us an instrument which is going to enable us, and which is enabling us today, to build up a unity which will be the envy of the whole world.
All India Radio Archives
I have no doubt in my mind. I thank my colleague, Sri Gopala Reddy, for giving me this honor of presiding today at the learned and charming lecture which was given by Sri K P S Menon.
You were listening to the first installment of the Patel Memorial Lectures by Sri K P S Menon on Resurgence of India, Reformation or Revolution. This was followed by excerpts from the presidential speech of Sri Morarji Desai.